All right, all right, all right. Thank you so much for joining me again. Today what we're going to do is talk about the actual contract. So here we actually have the contract that I'm writing up for the property. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and briefly go through the terms of this contract so you'll understand where I'm coming from and exactly what the idea is. So in this particular circumstance, I'm purchasing the property with a standard Arizona contract. Now, because I'm a real estate agent, a broker here in Tucson, a member of the Tucson Multiple Listing Service and the Realtor Association, I adhere to the Code of Ethics, which means that I have to do things a little bit differently than a traditional investor would do. In this particular circumstance, I have to use an Arizona state contract for the seller's protection as well as mine. This is to ensure that everybody is fairly protected on a standard contract that everybody can read and understand. This is a lot different than what many investors might use, a simple 2 or 3 page contract, which leaves a lot of room for that person to go ahead and do a lot of funny stuff. In this particular circumstance, we're going to use something that attorneys and everybody else recognizes as a standard contract. So I'm going to go through this with you today, and let's go ahead and explain where this is coming from. You saw me earlier look at the property. You saw me look at the values of the homes in the area. You saw me determine a price for the property, and you understand in this particular circumstance, I am actually buying the property personally. I'm not representing anybody. I'm buying it for a personal purchase. It's important for you to understand this. I am not looking to buy this to live in. I'm looking for something to actually buy so I can repair it and then turn around and sell it for a profit. That being said, it is really important that people understand from an investor's perspective that there can only be one profit. Right? You want to think of this like 2 pigs at a trough, right? There's only a certain amount of feed and only one of them is going to get fed. And in this particular circumstance, the corn in the trough, if you will, is the equity that the potential seller has. And I am the greedy pig. I've got to come in and I've got to make a little bit of money in order for me to buy the property at the right price so that when I turn around and sell it, there's enough equity left on the bone, enough meat on the bone, if you will, that a buyer will see this as a potential value and purchase this even though it's in a COVID-19 environment. So keep that in mind. I'm not purchasing this property to live in, and therefore the numbers are going to be a lot different. Okay? This is not the same as a retail purchase. So that being said, let's go ahead and go into the offer itself. Now, as you can see, it's me personally buying the property. The seller's name there, I'm going to go ahead and blot all that out just to keep them private for now. The address, legal description, and all that. Now let's get into the price itself. You'll see that the purchase price here is $160,000. Now in the calculations that we used, I said that the purchase price that I would want to come in at was $165,000. Now, since then, I've kind of thought a little bit more about it, and I recognize that we're going to need to do a little bit of work with that fence and a little bit of work with that pool that's probably going to be a little bit more than I anticipate. It's been a while since that pool's been maintained, and it's highly likely that that pump's going to need to be replaced too. So I'm going to account for a little bit more repair damage in the terms of the fence and in terms of the pump and the pool. Now, I've not seen the interior of the home. The interior could be a complete wreck, but I don't think that it's going to be more than what I suspect as far as repair costs go. So what I'm offering here is $160,000 with $10 earnest money. There's really no purchase, there's no point in putting a lot of earnest money down on an investment type property, and I'll tell you why. Because any kind of money, let's say if I was to quickly sell this property as a wholesale deal or something like that, any amount of money that I would get as earnest money back is considered taxable income. And so I want to minimize the amount of money that I put as earnest money down, not to mention the fact that since we're going to be closing in a week to 10 days, there's not much time for them to go ahead and count that earnest money. It's going to be closed before the check clears. So what we're going to talk about here is in this particular circumstance, I'm going to write down $159,900 in a private loan. Ultimately, I typically use cash. But I want to go ahead and keep the option open to use a private loan if I'm able to find favorable terms. If I'm not, well then fine, we'll use cash. But I'm going to leave the option open as a private loan because later on, if let's say it's cash, if I write down cash here, and then later on in escrow, let's say I want to use a private loan. Let's say I'm able to find a really good loan term with one of my private lenders. Well, then I'm going to be at a sort of a disadvantage because now I've got to go back to the seller and ask them to approve a change in the contract saying that we're going from cash to a private loan. And that can sometimes cause a seller a little bit of concern. But if I'm going from a private loan, and I say, well, gosh, instead I'm going to use cash, well, then there's no problem. Seller doesn't care about that. It doesn't affect them. So if I let them know in the beginning that my plan is to just go ahead and look for a private loan from one of my private investors who loaned to me first, and if that's the case, then I can find something great. If not, then I'll just go ahead and close in cash. Escrow, the earnest money obviously is a form of a personal check. It's $10, made out to the title company. We're going to say that the close of escrow is April 30th. Today is April the 10th, so it is highly likely that we will close this within the next 7 to 10 days, but I do not know what escrow's time frame is like. So I'm going to put a little bit of time period in there just to be safe, to ensure that we have enough time to do what we need to do. Possession is actually the day we actually close. It's not the day before, so they're not responsible for anything after the 30th, and they're not responsible for anything prior to that. Or I'm not responsible for anything prior to that. The things that go with the property are the fixtures and the personal property, all the things that are built in, things of that nature. Hang on just one second here. There we go. The refrigerator, the washer, the dryer, things of that nature, I'm not going to include them. If they have them, if they want to keep them and sell them, then that's their business. Other than that, anything that gets left behind is just mine. The financing, they put down the contingencies for the typical loans and things of that nature, and interest rates. I'm not worried about that. It's a private loan in this particular circumstance. I'm not asking for the seller to pay any closing costs whatsoever. There's no appraisals. Obviously, there's no need to have an appraisal. If they accept the price of $160,000, it's clearly worth that. The title and escrow company I typically use. I use Dina De La Osa over at Title Security Agency. Shout out to Dina. She's a great agent. Title investing, I usually take it as a personal property. Title insurance and title commitment will come out. Let's see what else we have here. Additional instructions. The title company is going to go ahead and do all the instructions to double check the title and make sure that everything's okay there. The taxes will be prorated to the day of closing. The earnest money is kept by the title company until the day it actually closes. The prorations are to the day of actual closing, not the day before and not the day after. That way they're not responsible for anything prior to that, and I'm not responsible for anything after that. If there's any assessments or liens, then that's going to be prorated. All this stuff is stuff that I need to find out during the inspection period. Now, they're going to have a seller property disclosure statement. I'm going to give them a form. It's a seller property disclosure statement. I'm going to ask them to fill it out because they know more about the property than I do. Now, recognize that this is an inherited property and they may not know anything. And if that's the case, that's fine too. Even just a simple signature saying I don't know anything is fine, because when I go to sell the property, it'll help keep the chain of custody for the property. It'll help keep that clear so everybody knows what's going on. Also, with insurance claims, this is important. Seller's going to need to contact their insurance agent to see if there was any claims on the property. And this is important for me as a buyer because I don't know anything about this home. I don't know if they've ever had mold in the property or any kind of claim against the property that would prevent me from getting insurance. Now, this is typically not something that you'll find. It's not something that happens, but it does happen from time to time. And this came up out of a case out of California, which disallowed somebody to have insurance on a property because of a previous mold claim. And so that's why this insurance claims history clause is here, is to protect me as a buyer as well as them as a seller, so I can't come back to them later and say, hey, I didn't know I couldn't get insurance. Another thing, foreign sellers. If they were a foreign seller, well, there's a certain tax that's may be withheld. They're not foreign sellers, so it doesn't really matter. In this particular case, the house was built in 1976. So it was built prior to 1978, and there's a possibility that there's lead-based paint in the property. And because of this, I need to be aware of that, and I do acknowledge the opportunity to conduct a lead-based paint risk assessment, which I'm not going to do. I just assume that it probably has lead in there anyway, but it's been repainted over 500 times. And so as long as I don't go chewing on the walls, I'll be okay. So I'll initial here and initial there. Then we'll see here it says the affidavit of disclosure. This is for properties that have areas that are in the unincorporated areas of the county and have 5 or fewer parcels. This is for things like wildcat subdivisions that happen in the outskirts of town. This is to help protect a buyer, to make sure that you don't get hooked up in an area where you're buying a property in a wildcat subdivision that doesn't have services or ingress or egress or anything like that. Changes during escrow. The seller will let me know automatically if there's any kind of changes that happen with their situation or the problem. Same thing with me. I'm going to let them know. This is also going to come in handy when we start talking about COVID-19, because remember, up in the very beginning of this contract, I probably skipped it, but I did mark down here that we would have a COVID-19 coronavirus addenda that's incorporated with this contract to help protect both the seller and myself during this pandemic. So we're going to go over that as well. But right back into where we were, changes during the escrow. We're going to go ahead and talk about that in a few minutes. Condition of the premises. The buyer and the seller are being sold in its present physical condition as of the date of the day they sign it. So meaning that they're selling the property to me as is. They don't have to do any kind of repairs. They don't have to do anything. In its current physical condition as of the day they sign it, that's what they're selling it for. Now, warranties. Now, if they knew, for example, that there was a problem in the ceiling of the roof or something like that, and they didn't tell me, well, that's a problem, because here it says that they do have to tell me, and they've disclosed to me in writing all the things they know about the property that could materially affect my decision to buy the property. Now, I'm letting them know here, hey, if there's anything that's going to affect my ability to close, I'm going to let you know. And this right here says none, because there's nothing stopping me from closing, especially if they accept it at this price. This would be a great price for me, right? Inspection period. The inspection period, now typically we say is 10 days, but because of coronavirus, this is making things a little bit more difficult. We can attempt to close as quickly as 7 days, but we don't know that everybody's going to be able to move as quickly because of this environment. So what we need to do is we need to say that we're going to close on or before the 30th of the month, but if we can close earlier, great, perfect, that works out great. We can always shorten this period, but we want to make sure that that inspection period goes up into the day of closing, because anything can change. And especially in a pandemic environment right now, I want to make sure if the stock market crashes in the next 2 weeks, let's say that for whatever reason the death rate spikes and there's a whole bunch of people dying, I don't know. If there's all kinds of problems, I want to make sure that I have an ability to make a decision if I have to. Square footage. I'm aware that the square footage is represented as 1,782 square feet in the tax assessor's record, but if it's important to me, I need to go out and measure it, right? Termites. I need to check for termites during my inspection period. Flood hazard. I need to check and see if it's in a flood zone, right? I also need to go ahead and make sure I can get insurance for the property, because if it's ever had flood insurance or a flood or maybe mold or some kind of major damage, there might be problems with me getting insurance. I understand that the property is on a sewer system. Now, this is tricky, because I've done it sometimes where I've bought the property thinking it was on a sewer system, and it was actually on a septic system. And that really required that extra days or two to go ahead and inspect the septic system. Typically, in a regular market, when things are going very well, my inspection period is only a day or two. It's not 20 days. But because of coronavirus, and I don't know where everybody's going to be able to, how quickly people are going to be able to act, I want to be able to save that time if we need it. Sewer connection. If it's important for me, I'll double check it, right? I'll initial there. Swimming pool. I know that there's barrier regulations, right? And that there are certain regulations I have to keep in mind, so I'll initial that as well. I also understand that nobody is putting a gun to my head, making me buy this property, and nobody's putting a gun to his head, making him sell this property. If they choose to sell the property to me for $160,000, then that is their choosing, and that's my willing, right? So that's the way it works. During the inspection period, the buyer shall deliver to the seller any notice of any items disapproved. Now, here's for me an opportunity, because I've not seen the inside of the property. This is where a lot of people are nervous to make an offer on a home if they've not seen the inside, because they don't know what they're buying. I don't mind that. And the reason why it doesn't bother me so much is because I've seen a lot of homes like this before, and I kind of know what I'm getting into when I open up the door. And that's why I suspect the repairs are going to be in the neighborhood of $40,000 to $45,000. Now, I could be wrong. Sometimes I am, but I'm probably not going to be. Now, here's the thing. If I am wrong, let's say I am wrong. Let's say it's $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 worth of damage. Let's say that there's mold crawling up the walls. It's all black mold, and the whole place has got to be burned to the ground, right? Worst case scenario, let's say that's the case, right? Well, if that's the case, then I have the ability to cancel the contract and get that $10 back, right? If for whatever reason we open that door and we discover that this is crazy, this is not what I want, well, then I have the ability to go ahead and immediately cancel the contract and get my money back. Or we could say, well, look, if this is not right, well, look, I'll tell you what, I didn't realize it was going to be this. Instead of $40,000, it's going to be, I don't know, let's say it's filled with black mold, right? Let's say it's $60,000 worth of damage. I mean, it is completely filled with black mold, right? Well, then I can always say to the seller, well, gosh, I'm still willing to buy it, but I can't do it at this particular price. I can do it at this price, right? I can give them an option. And if they're not willing to do that, well, then we can cancel the contract and everybody goes right back to where they were. They get their home back, I get my $10 back, and everybody goes back to the beginning, right? It's no big deal. Verbal discussions will not extend the time period. So we have to make sure that we put things in writing. And if I don't put it in writing, if I don't say, hey, I got a problem, well, guess what? We're going to just assume that everything is fine and keep moving forward, right? In this particular circumstance, I'm not asking for a home warranty. I'm not asking for a home warranty because I recognize that in this particular circumstance, this home is a fix-up property and there's nothing that I'm going to ask a home warranty company to repair. So there's no need for a seller or a buyer to spend the extra $300, $400 for a home warranty. Walk through. The seller's going to give me the permission to go ahead and walk through the property one more time prior to closing. Now, I'm going to tell the seller that they have the ability to take whatever they want out of the house. I do not care what it is. Just take what you want and leave the rest. They'll leave the rest. I'll go ahead and take those things that are remaining and I'll remove them. Now, prior to the closing, I'm going to walk through the property just to make sure everything's kind of what I thought it was. Make sure nobody came in and burned the house apart or tore the house apart or anything like that. And the seller has the opportunity or the responsibility to give me the opportunity to come through it. I mean, they can't just agree to something in paper and then let me go look at it one time and then close and then open up the door and what do you know, we've got all these problems. No, you have to give me the ability to walk through before I close, and the seller is going to allow me to do that. Additionally, the IRS and Foreign Investment and Real Property Tax Act provides that if the seller is a foreign person, there's a tax involved. And in this case, they're not. I think we mentioned that earlier. Let's talk about what happens if things go wrong. This is a big thing that people have questions about when they're making offers on properties, especially investment properties, or if you're a first-time home buyer, you're trying to buy a home. What do you do if things go wrong? This is important. This is exactly why we use the Arizona State contract instead of some cheap 3-page something you can download from the internet, because it provides a protection for both the seller as well as the buyer. And this is why we want to use this. So here we have what's the first part, which is called the cure period. It says that the party is going to have the opportunity to cure a potential problem. So if anybody fails to do what they're supposed to do, well, then the party who was aggrieved is supposed to send a notice to the other party saying, hey, look, you didn't do what you were supposed to do. And you've got 3 days to make it right. Right? If you don't close, say, for example, if I don't close on the 30th, well, the seller is going to come back and say, hey, you got 3 days to make it right. I'll have until, the 2nd of May, I guess it is. Well, no, I guess the 3rd of May, I guess would be the 3 days, right? So in any event, that would be what that is. Now, if that doesn't happen, if I don't close by that time, or if the seller, for whatever reason, fails to close, well, then we have what's called a breach of contract. And now we have a breach of our agreement. And when we have a breach of our agreement, well, now I can go ahead and come to the remedies that we say that we are going to agree. So if I fail to close, well, then the buyer gets to keep my $10. Okay. Otherwise, if he fails to close, well, then I get the right to go ahead and potentially go to court and sue him for damages. Now, this is unlikely. I can't think of a single example where I've ever heard of anybody doing that. I've not done it, but actually there was an example of somebody else doing it. I've heard in a court case one time. Somebody had sued somebody because they failed to close and they ended up getting foreclosed on. That was a Lombardi case, actually. It was a very big case, and that is an example of a breach of contract. Another way to handle that is what's called alternative dispute resolution, otherwise known as mediation. You don't necessarily have to go to court. This can go to mediation, and everybody agrees to go to mediation if there's some kind of problem where I don't close or he doesn't close, or there's some kind of issue where somebody lied about the condition of the property or the contract. Now, the things that are excluded from the dispute resolution or the mediation are things that are up to $3,500 that can be handled in $3,500 with a small claims court. If you can handle this in small claims court, up to $3,500 worth of damages, well then fine, that's where it'll go. What would be an example of this? So let's say, for example, if this was a retail contract and I was buying a home retail and I was to ask the seller to repair the roof. Let's say I was to say, look, Mr. Seller, that roof looks kind of crappy. Would you put a new coat of roof on there? And he goes up there and he puts $1,000 worth of roof work on a roof to give me a 2-year roof warranty and a repair. And then I fail to close. Well, now he's out $1,000. He could come back and sue me. Or in this particular case, he would have to take it to the small claims court because it's under $3,500. It would not go to mediation. It would, in fact, go to the small claims court. If it's more than $3,500, then we're agreeing to go to mediation. I've never really seen that happen, but if that's the way it happens, that's the way it's supposed to go. If, for whatever reason, people need to go to court, well, then you pay for your attorney, I'll pay for my attorney, the winner pays for the loser. I'm sorry, the loser pays for the winner. Wouldn't that be right? The loser pays for the winner. Okay, that's the boilerplate part of the contract. Now let's talk about some of the additional comments and contract concerns and things that we're going to have to put because I'm a realtor. Because I'm a realtor and an investor, a broker with 24 years of experience, I've worked in the industry for a very long time. I've sold hundreds of homes. I've worked and overviewed thousands of contracts, supervised agents. I mean, I have a lot of background information in this industry that would make it potentially unfair for a homeowner who does not typically do this industry, right? A homeowner who's not in the real estate game is not going to know about comparables. They're not going to know anything other than what I tell them. And if I have a deceitful heart, well, then there's a problem. So we need to make sure we put things in writing so that everybody understands 100% about what's going to happen, right? I mean, all the other parts of the contract were clear so far, but let's make things extraordinarily clear to protect both the seller as well as myself. Let's go into this. So the first part here is the broker disclosure, saying that I am in fact a licensed realtor in the state of Arizona. I'm a self-employed broker. I own my own company, my own location where I actually have my business, right? The seller will initial this to make sure they understand that they've been told I'm a real estate agent. Next, that there's no agency relationship, that I'm not representing them in any way, shape, or form. This is important for a lot of people who are going to troll me in the comments, and I can already hear the comments, see the comments already. So before you start trolling me, understand this is a different type of transaction. I am not acting as an agent. I am not acting as an agent. I'm not acting as an agent in any way, shape, or form for the seller. Instead, the seller understands and acknowledges that I'm acting as a principal to the transaction and that this capacity has been disclosed to the seller. This is important for sellers to understand. Now, I have met, and forgive me, if you're listening to this and you take offense, please forgive me in advance, okay? This is my own arrogance speaking, I know, and forgive me. I have been doing this for almost 24 years, and I have met hundreds of sellers, and it's always men, who say, well, I'm a good negotiator, I'll negotiate, I can handle my own. I can promise you, unless you've been doing real estate sales for 24 years or better, you are not going to out-negotiate me. It's not going to happen. The reason why is because you don't have, it's not because you're dumb or stupid. No, none of that. It's because you don't have the experience that I do. You don't understand how to make things work. So for example, typically when somebody negotiates in a contract, they negotiate as a principal to the transaction. They negotiate from their own self-interest. So when I make an offer of $160,000, that is an extraordinarily low offer, and I know that. They know that. Everybody knows it's low. But the purpose of it is because of what's going to happen next. You're going to see the reason why it's so low. And the value is found in the speed and the certainty. That's where the value added part of my business is the fact that there's speed, certainty, and you don't have to do anything. I'm taking care of all the problems. And this is why, as a principal to the transaction, I'm not trying to represent their interests. I'm not trying to get them the best dollar. I'm not trying to get them the highest price. If I was their listing agent, I would be doing that. If I was representing a buyer, I would be understanding that. But I'm representing myself. And my intent is to purchase this property at a price that will make it to where I can actually turn around and sell it at a reasonable cost to somebody else. That's going to be a reasonable profit to myself, and yet leave enough meat on the bone for the buyer to make it a good deal so they'll have something that they can close on quickly, so we don't have to be on the market for months and months and months trying to squeeze every single possible dollar out. That's the end goal. Next, commission. Buyer and the seller acknowledge that I am not receiving any commission for the completion of this transaction. Understand, commission implies representation. I am making it very, 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 very clear I am not representing anyone. I'm not accepting any commissions. I don't want commissions. I'm not representing anybody. It's just me who happens to be an agent, and I happen to have to go by these rules. Another rule, market information, right? Some people might say, well, gosh, Karl, they're not going to know how much their home is worth. They live out of state. They're going to say, well, gosh, it's how do they know? Well, I have to give them, right here, seller acknowledges that it has been provided by the buyer, market comparable information that they've deemed material to determining the consideration provided for the transaction, and that the sellers reviewed such information. In other words, they're getting a comparable market analysis showing them everything that is sold in that neighborhood in the last 6 months to 12 months. I'm going to show them everything I just showed you so they can see, and I'm going to tell them, you will make more money if you list the home. I don't know how to put it any clearer. So before you troll me in the comments, understand I am telling people they will make more money if they sell it on the multiple listing service, that they will make less money if they sell it to me. That's what I tell them. But some people do not care about that. They want to sell it because they want the hassle gotten rid of. That's the more concern to them, right? Next, resale or lease. I have to let them know. Again, as a realtor, I have to let them know this. A regular investor does not have to share this information, but I do. This is what makes it incredibly different for me, right? So resale or lease says that the seller acknowledges and understands the buyer is purchasing the property with the intent to assign a repair or resell the property for a higher value and or lease the property to generate a profit. I don't know what I'm going to do with the properties I buy. I put this on every single contract I buy. Every single property I buy or every contract I write, because I don't understand. I don't know exactly what I'm going to do with that property. I might buy the property and rent it out, fix it up and rent it out. I might buy the property, put it on the multiple listing service and sell it right away for a profit. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I do know this. I'm going to resell it for a profit. I'm not living in it. I'm not trying to make a lifestyle there at the house. I'm trying to sell the property for a profit. Next, advice, right? The seller acknowledges that I have not provided them any advice to the suitability of the transaction. They understand that I have recommended that they seek counsel from insurance people, tax people, legal people, and accounting professionals regarding the risks associated with the transaction. Now listen, when you sell a property, there are tax risks associated with that. You get a capital gains. There's a bunch of things that happen. I'm not a CPA. I'm not an attorney. But I always tell you, hey, you need to go catch one. You need to go check one out, talk to one before we actually close, because there are things you need to know. We let them know that, right? Next, seller closing costs. Buyer agrees to pay all normal seller closing costs. In this transaction, because it is so cheap that I'm the price that I'm giving him is so small, so low, right? You could say a low ball if you want to or whatever, but the price I'm giving him is so low, I am not going to ask them to pay their closing costs. I will pay the closing costs in their stead. I pay all the normal closing costs. I take the property exactly the way it is. It's as is, where is. So you can go ahead and decide for yourself if that's what you want. That way you can go ahead and make an accurate decision. Now, if the property burns down, right, between now and the day we actually close, well, it's still their property. Permission, well, if it was a listed property, we'd put a sold sign in the yard, but it's not listed, so we won't. This is governed under Arizona law, not Tahitian law, and the time is of the essence, meaning that I'm going to respond to you and you're going to respond to me, and we're going to talk to each other about what needs to happen quickly. We're not going to waste time, right? We understand that the compensation, if there was any brokers involved, any other agents involved, then they would be paid via a separate agreement. They're not considered in the contract here, and in this case, there are no other agents, so it's simply me. Copies and counterparts, meaning that this contract itself is the entire thing, right? Plus with any other addenda that go along with it, and if I send you a copy of it via fax, then it's just as good as having the original. Days, all the days are constructed as 12 a.m. to 11:59 p.m., and we work off calculating days as calendar days, not business days, right? This is the entire agreement, nothing up my sleeve. The seller has the right to take more than one offer. So if somebody comes along and says, oh, what? You sold it to Karl Buys Houses for $160,000. That's crazy. Geez, I would have gave you $170,000. Well, then you have the right to take that offer, provided that I fail out. If I fail apart, then you can have them as a backup offer, right? Cancellation. Any party who decides to cancel the property has to deliver the notice. We can't just cancel people or cancel contracts by refusing to pick up the phone. You have to actually let people know, right? Notice. I have to let people know in writing things. I can't just say things, right? And release of the brokers. If there was any brokers involved other than myself, they would be released from any kind of liability. They were just putting us together. I'm going to give them until Monday at 8 a.m. to think about it. It is currently Friday the 10th, so they'll give them 2 or 3 days to think about this. Now, I recognize that they're going to have another person come out and give them an opinion, but I think this is a fairly decent offer, at least considering the coronavirus circumstances that I'm in. So let's talk about the COVID-19 addenda, right? Again, this is just between me and the seller regarding the property. Again, the current worldwide COVID-19 has impacted real estate transactions in ways including but not limited to travel restrictions, etc., etc., etc. Everybody understands that this is going on. I'm going to initial this. They're going to initial this, right? Now, there's a couple different choices that I'm going to have as a buyer to handle this issue. There's a variety of issues that happen that are outside of the control of anybody. And so we have to determine how we're going to do this. If we were in the middle of an escrow, I could extend it by using this right here. I'm not planning that right now. This right here is an automatic extension for 10 days. This one is an automatic extension for 10 days up until after a quarantine order is lifted. So if for some reason between now and then we have a quarantine in effect up until the 30th, but real estate is considered an essential activity, and so you can go to closings and do closings via mail and so on and so forth. I don't anticipate any problems closing, but if for some reason between now and the next 20 days, between the end of the month, there's something that goes catastrophically wrong, well, then we have the opportunity to extend things automatically. And if for some reason it goes beyond 30 days, well, then I'm not obligated to the contract, and neither are they. But if we can close it within the next week to 10 days, then that works for everybody. So we'll go ahead and we'll sign it right there. So that is how we're going to go ahead and handle this contract. I hope this was of value to you. If it was, do me a favor. Would you like, rate, subscribe, and share? This is another form that we'll obviously use. That this is more for me than them, but this is just to let them know, obviously, that the market does go up and down. We started using this form back in 2008 when the market collapsed, and we will, I believe, start using this again. So this is another form that we'll be using in addition to this contract. So again, if this was of any value to you, thank you so much for paying attention. Would you just do me a favor, like, rate, subscribe, and share this? I sure would appreciate it. And as always, have a powerful sales day. Bye-bye.